blowback. The blowback is when an intelligence asset goes against its sponsors. So that, in fact, what we had was a war on terrorism against Al-Qaeda, however, based on the concept that Al-Qaeda was waging a war on America, when in fact Al-Qaeda was an instrument of US intelligence, an intelligence asset, and what is very important is that Al-Qaeda has remained an intelligence asset from the outset right up until today, okay? And why do I say that? It's because there are mountains of evidence that show that there's collaboration, active collaboration between the US military, US intelligence, German intelligence, MI6, the British Secret Service of Her Majesty. I was born in the UK, but in Wales, okay? and of Irish descent from Northern Ireland. Yeah.
We'll forgive
you. But I know that my name, it doesn't sound Irish, but I am an Irish citizen as well. Now, we were told that we are waging a war on terrorism, when in fact the target of that war on terrorism is in fact a partner in the war on terrorism. You understand what I mean? Is Al-Qaeda is the target of a war on terrorism. This is part of US military doctrine. It's something which permeates our understanding of everyday life. We're waging a war on the jihad. But then when you start to dig a little bit and you look at all the reports, and now it's pretty obvious with Libya and Syria, that these Islamic organizations, their networks, are intelligence assets. I'm not suggesting they necessarily are agents of the CIA. I'm saying they are financed covertly, they're supported. Usually the financing comes from Saudi Arabia. The Wahhabi missions, the Islamic fundamentalist missions come from Saudi Arabia. They go to the training camps. The training camps are financed, supported by the ISI on behalf of the CIA. That is very fundamental, that we understand that the object of this war on terrorism are in fact the instrument of that war. In other words, it's not the global war on terrorism, it's the global war on terrorism with the terrorists. And I call that the WTT. Okay, it's waging the war on terrorism with the terrorists. And of course, the whole process is terrorism, because it's weapons of mass destruction in the real sense of the word. They never use it when they never say we have weapons of mass destruction. No, Bin Laden has weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. But when we go with B-2 bombers, okay, or the Canadian. What is it, 518s? They cost, what? F-18s. Yeah, they cost $500 million, but the B-2s cost about $2 billion, okay? And they have bunker buster bombs, and they also have mini nukes, tactical nuclear weapons. They're equipped. And incidentally, just for your information, because I've done a lot of work on nuclear weapons, Libya was the first country to be targeted with mini nukes back during the Clinton administration. It's on record. They had a plan to wage a preemptive attack on Libya, which was it was not carried out, but it was presented by the Department of Defense at the time, and that preemptive war, nuclear attack on Libya is still on the drawing board of the Pentagon. In fact, together with a whole series of other countries. Okay, so 9/11 serves as a justification for waging a preemptive war, not only conventional warfare, but nuclear war, where the nuclear weapons are now, these tactical nuclear weapons, which, according to the Pentagon, are harmless to the surrounding civilian population because the explosion is underground. In fact, it's only 20 feet underground. They are now reclassified by the, in fact, the decision came from the US Senate. They are reclassified and they can be used in the conventional war theater alongside the other weapon systems. In military doctrine, they call this the toolbox. Now, if somebody has a briefcase, or well, I can do it. The toolbox. If you have a toolbox there, it's full of weapons. Okay. Now that toolbox, I'm using the military term. The toolbox can be Kalashnikovs, tactical nuclear weapons, cruise missiles, and what has happened now is the commander in the war theater must optimize, a little bit like we do in economics. We maximize, we have to use the most efficient combination of weapons. So what they do is they go into their toolbox and they pull out a nuclear bomb, or they pull out a Kalashnikov, but they have the choice. And it's the nuclear weapons are there in the same toolbox with the conventional weapons, as far as tactical nuclear weapons are concerned. That is an extremely dangerous development, because nuclear weapons are now considered a weapon of self-defense. There's such a thing as a preemptive use of nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states. I won't elaborate, but please understand that what we're dealing with is a military agenda. It's a roadmap. Several countries have been identified. And it's not only the rogue states, Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, which were identified when Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, former Commander-in-Chief of NATO, and he recorded this in his memoirs, confirmed that there were a number of countries. We knew that already, but incidentally, China and Russia also identified in that list. And all these countries are identified for nuclear attack. Okay. Now, I'd like to turn my attention to the present situation in the Middle East. Martin Azemroya will talk in greater detail on Libya. He has just returned. However, what we must understand is that in both Syria and Libya, there are Al-Qaeda affiliated paramilitary which are involved in the situation is quite different between the two countries because there are different levels in the process. Okay, but maybe I'll say something briefly on Libya, and then we'll discuss Syria. In Libya today, what has been confirmed and what is known is that Al-Qaeda affiliated organizations constitute the backbone of the rebel forces from a military point of view. Okay? In other words, they are the dominant force on the front line. They are trained. They're trained in CIA camps. Okay? They are Al-Qaeda affiliated. They belong, or they, let me qualify that, they belong to the Libya Islamic Fighting Group. Now, if you read between the lines of CNN reports, they will actually acknowledge the fact that the main commanders and fighters belong to the Libya Islamic fighting group, but they say two things. They say, first of all, the Libya Islamic fighting group has been disbanded, it doesn't exist anymore. And secondly, they say they are no longer members of the Libya Islamic fighting group. They are former members of that organization, and now they formed another Islamic organization, of which I forget the logo at this point. But what the message we get from the media is they will acknowledge the fact that there are former Al-Qaeda commanders, but then they say, in a very twisted way, they are now fighting for democracy, okay? So now they say these are former bad guys. Now, let me use the good guy, bad guy terminology is always very revealing, because that's the terminology they use. They will say, no, these are no longer bad guys. They are former terrorists, and now they are good guys because they are fighting for democracy, okay? You understand the logic. And then they say the Libya Islamic fighting group in any event doesn't exist anymore, so they can't be members of that organization. Yet, when you check the State Department registry on that, they're still on the list. And then you go to the United Nations Security Council website, and there they are. The Libya Islamic fighting group is still recognized as a bona fide terrorist organization. And you would have thought that they would have had thought of knocking it off their website. Well, in fact, they did at one point. I accessed the website in April, and they were still on there. And then I accessed it about a week ago, and I couldn't get through onto the list. And then a reader said, oh, they've reclassified, and they're distinguishing between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but the LIFG is still there, okay? So the LIFG is a terrorist organization. CNN says, it doesn't exist. And two, they say the people who belong to it are no longer members because it doesn't exist. And they are former bad guys. And now they're fighting with rebel forces, but in fact, there's nobody else. Okay, militarily, there's nobody else. What you get, Marty will be able to elaborate on this, then you get armed gunmen, which are, a lot of them are teenagers, usually not very well trained, and then their mandate is essentially to terrorize the population. But please understand that the consensus, and that's why I say that consensus is extremely fragile, because it is ultimately it's kind of an inquisitorial consensus. It's a bit like the Spanish. I'm glad we're under the United Church, because I don't need to, because it was the Catholic Church which was behind the Inquisition. But sorry about that. But the Spanish and French Inquisition are not based on any kind of factual understanding of the real world. Okay. You're with the Inquisition or you're against it, and if you're against it, well then you know what happens to you. You're a conspiracy theorist. That's exactly what it is, okay? Because the global war on terrorism is an inquisitorial doctrine. It's not based on fact, and I just demonstrated that it can't be based on fact, because the people who are the target of the global war on terrorism are partners in the war on terrorism, okay? So you can't say, I'm going after bin Laden. Well, I'm sorry, he's dead now. God bless him, or at least allegedly. But you can't go after Al-Qaeda and then say, oh, we've got Al-Qaeda units in our war in Libya, for pro-democracy. Oh, but Al-Qaeda is no longer Al-Qaeda, now they're pro-democracy, etc. And we have to believe that. So that is an inquisitorial doctrine, because it is based on falsehood and it's based on lies.